So my name is Steven. I'm product manager at Google for the identity platform. So you may better know the identity platform from the products that we offer to developers like you. So that's the Google sign-in button that you might see in a lot of the apps out there. We also offer one called Smart Lock for passwords for all of your legacy users, remembering how people logged in, which button they pressed, and signing them in automatically next time. And then we also have one that we recently launched at Google I/O called the Firebase Auth. Okay, getting any better? Great. All right, so before I was at Google, though, I was actually a developer. I worked on a couple of startups and built things like authentication. Facebook SDK almost 6 years ago. And so in all of that time, I've looked at many, many apps and looked at the authentication systems they provide, the different ways that they get users logged in, and signed up, and seen a lot of what works well, and doesn't work as well. And so in all of that time and over the last few years, I've basically come up with a couple of recommendations, suggestions that we tell to all of the apps and the developers that we work with on a day-to-day basis. And I sort of put them together here in a presentation. This is a pretty new one that I've only used once before. And I'm really looking for feedback from the community, from developers like you, on some of these ideas, whether you like them, if you'd be interested in implementing them, and some of the performance you see if you do use some of these recommendations. And so that's what this talk is all about, is improving the systems that developers build to get people signed up and signed in, primarily re-authentication of existing users on the same device when they come back. And there's actually another talk later today on security, using things like the fingerprint to help users in that scenario. So with that little bit of introduction, let's get started, and we'll take a look at the experience in apps and some things you can do to make them better. So this is a picture. This is, I guess, from the U.S. And about 100 years ago in the United States, there was this thing called prohibition. You couldn't go out to a bar or a restaurant and buy a drink, and that may sound crazy in a place like Germany, and the United States is a little crazy, so maybe that is true. But you'd have to, if you wanted to get a drink, you'd have to go to one of these secret places, go down a dark alley and knock on the door, and you'd have to know a special word to be able to get into what they call a speakeasy, a secret bar or pub. And 100 years later now in the United States, you can in fact go online to order your drink. You can get a drink anywhere, and you can even have it delivered to you, but you still need to know the secret word, and that's your username and your password. So some things have improved in 100 years, and some are still about the same. But that's really not the experience that you want to be giving to all of the users of your websites or your apps. You want to be giving them a warm welcome. They'd like to come to a place where everybody knows their name. And that means knowing who they are, being able to customize an experience to their preferences, to their tastes, remembering their history, remembering the information they used last time to be able to check out, and really facilitating a lot of the interactions that you'd love to see in your apps. People staying engaged across devices, completing transactions, buying things and keeping you in business by knowing who your users are. So there's really a valuable opportunity here to make a great experience for all of the users who sign in and sign up to your apps. But it's, often not the case that we provide that great experience that we really want to. So let's look at an example. And this, I think, is a very typical user experience for an app. So when you download a brand new app, you might see a screen that looks like this. And I was just at the talk downstairs, and someone was saying that, when someone does get a new app or try something out as a new install, they'll often look at this app, and many people will uninstall right away within a few minutes. And it's often experiences like this, right? So they see an app, it has the name here and a fancy graphic, something like that, and a sign in and a sign up button, but it really doesn't say what this app is all about. It doesn't say what the experience is that they'll try or get once they've added some information or provided the information to sign up. And it can be really discouraging to keep going. But, let's suppose we've got a dedicated user, and let's see what their experience is as they go through all these flows and some of the problems they might run into. So the first thing is sign up. So in this example, I've got a friend. I'm going to use a friend of mine, Alex, and she's going to sign up here. And I think she's lucky that the sign-up screen doesn't actually ask for all of that information. Often there's a lot more things, payment information, addresses, and so on that are required up front. But, let's say she's dedicated and wants to try this out. So she's put in her email address and, created a password here, had to type it in twice. And the little ducks here, these are the number of times you have to type in the password, the secret code. So we're at 2 so far, and let's see what happens. Oh, you know what? She has already tried this app before, but, it's hard to remember sometimes. There's a lot of apps out there, and I'm sure many people here have had this experience where you try to sign up for something and it says your account already exists. All right, so what are we going to do instead? We're going to try to sign in. So let's try one more time, username, password, the same one that we use everywhere, which, by the way, is not a good idea. Don't do that. Let's try it. Oh, and it's the wrong password. So what do we do next? Someone has to be kind of dedicated at this point to actually try to recover from a scenario like this. We see most people who see that, sign-in failure screen, forgot password, actually give up. But Alex is very dedicated. She really wants to try the food app. So next thing we need to do is get a recovery email, and that means flipping over to the mail app and hoping that, it ends up in the inbox and not in spam and not in some folder, doesn't get delayed or lost, which can be pretty problematic. Half the time the email doesn't show up. But if it does, we got a link here we can click on, and, a couple more times to enter a new password, reset, and, got to log back in. So that's one more time. But we're there. We've just logged into the app. Not too bad. But yes, this is not actually the native app. This is the web app because we clicked on a link from the email. So not quite there. One more time. Back to the native app. Enter the information. And Alex is finally in. 7 tries. Not too bad. Could be worse. So let's see what we can do. And, this isn't even the worst case scenario. In fact, in many apps where there's other ways to log in, it can get even more complicated. So you'll have all of these buttons at the top. You have to remember which one it was you used last time, figure out what happens if you pick a different option this time. And then there's still all of these legacy users with username, password, and then there's this perennial problem of having a sign-in versus a sign-up version of your UI. And so not only is this complicated for an end user who's trying to figure out their way through all of these different possibilities, but it's very complicated for you to build a system like this. So let's see what we can do. And I'd really like to emphasize, why this is important. That in the research that we've seen in the industry and, even on Google properties ourselves, we see that about half of people who see a sign-up screen or a sign-in screen don't actually complete it. They don't actually get into the account they intend to. They give up, abandon, or they have to go through a recovery flow. Or even worse, they end up with a duplicate account or in the wrong account, something like that. So there's really an opportunity here. There's an opportunity, basically, to get as many as twice the number of users through these flows, twice as many people converting, getting into your app, and becoming engaged users if we just made this easier. So let's take a look at some of the things that we can do. And so the general suggestions that I've made to apps that I've looked at, and we've probably looked at and discussed with hundreds of apps over the last couple of years, kind of fall into these 6 buckets about asking to sign in at the right time, getting someone's information about what identity they'd like to use first so we can help steer them to the right place, and then help them sign up easily if they need to sign up, sign back in automatically if that's possible, link existing accounts together, and leverage all of the different libraries and tools that are out there to make this easier for you to implement. So let's go through some of the details. The first kind of, almost common sense principle is asking at the right time. And it's, the experience that I talked about at the beginning, that when someone opens up a new app and they see this first screen, they're always wondering, what is this about? What do I get out of providing information here to sign in or to sign up? And so there's really a couple simple things you can do. So this is an example of Captain Train, which is in France. Developers that we know well, they work closely with Google. And, they've, added a little bit here that says, what their app is about, what it does, as well as having the, standard sign-in options. So that's pretty easy, and that doesn't even take that much work. But you can even do a little bit more sophisticated things. You can, for example, let someone try out your app first, create a little bit of data before they're asked to sign in and sign up. And I think a lot of the commerce and the travel apps that are out there actually do this pretty well. They let you do a search, maybe even book something before asking you to create an account. And then, you can understand then why if you've created a little bit of data with this app, it might be a lot more compelling to create that account. And then kind of the last general suggestion I give people is, when it does come time to ask someone to sign up, give them a good reason why. So explain some of the value proposition. This is from The Guardian. I think that it's a little bit verbose here. It says all kinds of different things that you might get out of creating an app with or an account with The Guardian. But at least providing one sort of clear and concise value proposition to the user and a clear call to action, I think will really help improve the conversion of a sign-up flow, especially for those new users if you're paying for app installs and want to get the most value for you and for your users out of a new install. Okay. So that's the first, general idea. Ask at the right time to sign in or sign up. So let's take a look then at what happens next. So as I illustrated earlier, this screen is kind of complicated. It's got a lot of options here, different ways that people can sign in, sign up, and they have to remember a lot of information. It's not just remembering the username and password anymore. It's also remembering which button they pressed last time, because there can be all kinds of strange situations that people end up in if they pick a different button next time. And I'm sure if you've seen a screen like this, you probably have asked some of these questions to yourself. Which button was it that I used last time? What happens if I pick a different button this time? Am I going to end up with duplicate accounts? Am I going to have to link accounts together? What does linking accounts actually mean? Or am I just going to end up in an error state? So what could we do here to try to make this easier? And there's a couple of interesting ideas that I've seen, and let's take a look at some examples. So this is an app in the US called Instacart. There's a few others that do something similar, such as Pinterest. And what's really exciting here is they've basically taken a big step. They've made an interesting innovation, which is to merge sign in and sign up. There's only one version of this UI, and that is to show all of the options and then ask for something like an email address. Once they get that email address, they put somebody into the sign in or sign up flow intelligently. So how that works is basically in clicking on, say, the email option, or maybe even at the very beginning, they'll ask the user, hey, which identity would you like to use? An identity can take a couple of different forms. So in this example here, the Zillow app, they're using email-based identity. So by asking the user for the email address that they'd like to use with this app, they can do something very clever, which is go off to their backend server and say, hey, does an account exist for this email address already? And in the same way that we saw the error message earlier that said, hey, an account already exists, you shouldn't be creating one, we could do this intelligently for the user. We could say, we already see that you've got an account and you should sign in. In fact, we can do even better. We see that you signed in last time with a password, or last time with Google or with Facebook, and that's the method that you should use. So we can avoid this whole problem of having people to remember which is the right option for them, sign in versus sign up, or even how to sign in at all. And there are some great examples out there. This is another one called Eventbrite, a ticketing app used for events like this, and they'll do this thing perfectly. They take your email address, they say you need to sign in with a password, or you need to sign up. And they take all of that burden off of the user. So a really interesting idea here to explore. It does take a bit of work. You'll need some back-end support. You'll have to protect that endpoint from being spammed by the bad guys looking for valid accounts. But if you can do this properly, it can really streamline the flow for your end users and unlock a lot of interesting opportunities. All right. So that's the idea of putting somebody into sign in and sign up intelligently. And let's take a look at the mechanics then of going through each of these flows. So let's start with sign up. And a sign up screen these days, often I see in apps just essentially a wholesale copy of their web UI, of the desktop version where people had a full keyboard and they could type a lot of information in much more easily than they could on a mobile device. And so this is really a painful experience, as you can imagine. It's got things like duplicated fields where you have to type the same information in multiple times. It's got some stuff that probably doesn't matter too much. Things that people might hesitate a little bit to provide up front. And then there's some sensitive things like phone numbers or things that we really could have got basically automatically on a mobile device, such as the user's location. So there's some opportunities here that in reality this could be much streamlined. And let's take a look at some of the mechanics of doing it. And note that, this is even just step one. There's more. There's things like creating a password, which I'll talk about in a sec. So the first one that I suggest is that, on Android, there's actually a set of APIs that allow you to get the user's name and email address. And some of them in older versions of Android required these device permissions that you could get in install time. And there are others for Marshmallow moving forward that allow you to get this information at runtime without a permission. And some of the ones that I suggest are using things like the Google and the Facebook login SDKs that will give you things like name and email address. They'll even give it to you in a verified form that allow you to skip sending a verification email, or using things like the system account chooser at the framework level, or other ideas like a recent API that we put out there as Google, part of the smart lock set of APIs called a hint request, to get something that looks like this. It's a simple system dialog that says, would you like to sign up with such and such information previously used, the same autocomplete ideas that have been around in browsers like Chrome for a long time. And then if the user selects that entry, the app is called back, and you can basically fill 3/4 of a sign-up form, the name, the email address, picture, and so on, and skip things like sending an email verification. Okay, so then the next big idea that I see where there's a huge opportunity, if we look at all of the users going through a sign-up flow, there's this big drop-off when you ask them for more information. And the more information could take the form of things like social data, their friends and contacts, that asking for that upfront is a very low conversion request, that people will look at this and say, do you really need to know all of my friends or my contact info, my addresses up front? My suggestion is ask for this later. Get somebody in the door, create their account, and then when it's relevant, in context, when you need to share something or when you need to ship something to somebody, then ask them, hey, what's your address? Who are your contacts? And explain to them why you need this information. So separate out these concepts of authentication, identifying the user, and authorization, asking for more information. Incremental authorization. Maximize the conversion of your sign-in flow, get people in the door. And so there's a couple of good examples out there. This is the Runkeeper app. And what they do is get you in with one tap on a UI very similar to what I showed previously, and then later, in context, ask, hey, do you want to connect your Fit? Do you want to share with your friends? And then use things like Google or Facebook data at that point. All right, so if you can minimize what people enter, then make it easy for them to enter that remaining information. And this is a screenshot not of an Android app. This is actually a web UI. And I include it here in an Android-oriented talk because we often see that many developers will send people or at least have new user acquisition on the web, mobile web especially, when it's the first time someone encounters your service through search. So you have to think about all pieces and all points where someone will interact with your sign-up UI. And doing this on the web can be made a lot easier. You can annotate the form fields there with things like first, last name, and email address autocomplete attributes so that people will be able to click in, use previously used information with one tap, fill things out much more easily. But the field I'd really like to talk about here is this one, the password field. So in the password field, I think that people's biggest hurdle here is when they see a repeated password field, especially a masked one. So that means where the characters that you enter, you can't see, they've got little stars or dots, and you have to enter it twice, and it has to be the same both times. There's a lot of research out there, and if you just search for why the password confirmation field must die, you can actually see some of these numbers that people have studied themselves, that having that user experience of creating a password twice and making sure it's the same is very poor conversion, very troublesome. And you can do much better by something like we've got here in some example apps, where if you're signing up on mobile and somebody's probably not looking over your shoulder, you can actually show the password as it's entered in clear text. And then when someone moves to the next field, mask or hide it again, or at least have a show and a hide button. And I think one of the DevRel people in Berlin here, Tim in the front row, actually wrote a library that helps do this. I was looking at his slides last night. And so there's a lot of great tools out here to make this a much better experience and improve the conversion. If there's anything I suggest out of this talk, it's really about measurement, about seeing how many people drop off at each point and thinking about what you can do to ease each step in the process. Okay, so now that we've got somebody into the app, there's one last idea out here that I think is a little bit cutting edge these days, and that is that you could, in fact, offer to create an account without a password for some users. And that could be done, as you might have seen actually in some examples, by generating a temporary password or simply sending somebody an email after they've signed up with one tap by entering their email address to say, hey, welcome to our service. If you'd like to set a password, you can set it later by clicking on this link. Because most people who are signing up probably won't actually need that password, and many of them will forget it anyway. So why not get them in the door with one click? And then engage them, tell them what your service is about, and if it does become something that they're really appreciative and becomes valuable to them, you can get them to create a password later. So that's an idea that I want to throw out there, and I would love feedback from the community on how this works for you. The user experience when someone is coming back is tricky. If you can do what I suggested earlier, going identifier first, you can help people who are in these scenarios and make it a smooth experience, even if they don't have a password. Okay. So now that we've got somebody signed up, let's see what we can do to keep them signed in, because that experience is the one that people don't want to run into and the one that people will run away from if they encounter it. So on Android, there's a couple of different APIs through things like the Facebook and Google SDKs, and with the API that I mentioned earlier, Smart Lock, that allows you to save and retrieve login information, sign people in automatically when they come back. And this is a super cool experience. There's some big apps, even ones here, local ones in Germany, like Komoot in Potsdam, and a few others that we're working with, to make this experience smooth as you go between devices. You open up the app on a new install and get automatically signed in. So check those out. But if you do have to sign somebody in and you can't do it automatically, there's a few ideas of asking for that email address first, looking up how they need to sign in, and maybe even triggering that flow automatically. So if you know this person signed in with Facebook last time or Google last time and that they're coming back because they provided their email address, why not trigger that flow automatically and get them signed in? And then lastly, the idea is that once you do have someone signed in, do what you can to keep them signed in. And so that's doing things like proper session management. The auth 2 protocol defines this pretty well, and that's doing things like using an access token for short-lived authentication to a back-end service, and then keeping a refresh token on this device that you can then periodically update the access token. And in that way, you have all of the guarantees of being able to periodically check for this user's account state and shut short-lived sessions off if there's ever a big account change, like you need to log someone out everywhere. But you also have the ability to keep people's information up to date on an ongoing manner without having to have them re-authenticate or sign back in. So check out the auth 2 models. Those are actually pretty well established in apps, and I think apps in general do a much better job than websites of keeping people signed in. So then coming towards the last big step, and that is, once you've got somebody who's coming back, if you can't help them and they're going to sign in manually, at the very least, check whether they've got an existing account and try to link it to them. And so what does account linking mean? So the idea here is that suppose someone comes to your app and they click the Google button. They get a Google sign in and you're returned this token that has the person's email address in it. Google is the authoritative source for knowing that this person is logged in on this device or in this browser, and you can take that information and sign them into an existing email address, even email address-based account, even if they'd used a password last time, because Google is the authority. So it's the idea that if you have someone coming back and you can match their identifier, their email address, or their phone number against an existing account, try to sign them back in automatically. But you do have to be a little bit careful here, and that is that in some cases, the information that you get may not be authoritative. So Google is authoritative for Gmail addresses, but for phone numbers, we're not, and Facebook logins in particular. If you get an email address from Facebook, Facebook cannot assure that this user is the owner of that email address. You may have to ask them to log into their original account before you allow them to link it to the existing one. So that's a very important security point that's to be aware of. You have to do account linking properly, and unfortunately this can be a confusing situation. So try to get somebody signed in automatically if you can't first. All right, and the last point here, I see this problem all of the time, and that is that as I mentioned, things like phone numbers and email address identifiers for users can change. And if you're logging someone in with Google or with Facebook, you'll get another identifier with it, a stable identifier, a string that you can use, can store in your user database. And that's really the one that you should use to look up your user when they come back. If you're using things like Facebook or Google login, don't rely just on the email address. And that is a little bit bigger change in the back-end database, but it's a really important one to handle these edge cases and something to be aware of. People's email addresses may change, and so be careful of it. And so the last piece, and really the takeaway from this entire talk, is that I want to emphasize that there are better alternatives out there than building this yourself, especially if you're a new developer or you're looking to add an account system to an app for the first time. And so some of the examples of this, and I'll get to this in a moment, to this UX flow diagram here, and why you don't want to end in that scenario. But I'd really like to emphasize the problem with passwords, and that passwords are a huge liability. That when you've got this database of hopefully hashed and salted passwords, it's essentially a matter of time before the bad guys come after you and try to steal this information. Because if you're a little app right now, no one may care, but as you become bigger and you become a bigger target, as I mentioned, it's only a matter of time. Eventually someone will realize that the user data you've got is valuable enough to come and try to steal it. And I'm not sure how many people in this room are security experts or would claim to be, but I can tell you who are the experts at knowing exploits and problems in authentication systems. And that is the bad guys. This is their full-time job, and it's really basically hope that a lot of apps rely on in ensuring that their back-end systems are up to date, that they're using the latest techniques to securely hash passwords and so on. There's only a few companies in the world, ones like Google and Microsoft and Facebook, that can dedicate full-time security teams, engineers to combat potential exploits against the password system. So as we've seen throughout the industry, there's high-profile examples like Medium here, Slack, that have moved away from the password model. They ask for an email-based identity or a phone number-based identity that's then based on one-time codes, sending an email or an SMS each time to log the user in, and avoiding the database of passwords altogether, avoiding that liability. So that is tricky to do, and there's a few things that you can do to find a happy middle ground. It's things like identifying those people who are signing in with Gmail or Microsoft or Yahoo email addresses and asking the authoritative email providers using their SDKs to help authenticate these users, basically pushing the burden of authenticating this person over to the experts, to the people who maintain and build these systems. And then there's a bunch of libraries out there provided by Google, Microsoft, and even identity-specific vendors that are built around and provide all of these services. So there's some to look at in detail. And if I have a few minutes, I think I'll look through one example here, which is one provided by Google called Firebase. Okay, so let's try it out. Let's see what it would take to actually implement all of the practices that I've talked about in this talk. So the first thing is we need to build a sign-in screen, and let's get started there by putting the email and password field as normal. We have to keep the password database secure, but Firebase actually provides a back-end service to do this, so we're okay there. And the next thing that we have to do now that we can sign people in is, of course, help them sign up. You can't have a sign-in system without sign up. And we've done that clever thing of asking for the email address first. So far so good. Doesn't look too complicated. You could probably build this yourself. But, it gets worse because people forget their passwords. So now you need a recovery flow. You need to be able to send emails, prevent spam, things like that. So getting a little bit more complicated, but then, you'd actually like to go passwordless. So that means using the identity providers that I mentioned, the Google and the Facebook options. And, start with Google, but you probably still need a Facebook option. And then you have this other problem that I mentioned earlier, which is so-called account linking existing accounts with email and password to something that you've gotten from Google or from Facebook. And so now you need a little bit more UI to handle that. So starting to get complicated, unfortunately. And then, on top of that, apply all of these other best practices that I mentioned. Things like saving how someone logged in using the smart lock APIs, assisting them by autofilling the email address, and so on. And so you now have got a bunch more APIs to include, and it starts to look pretty complicated. But the worst thing is, we're the Android developers here, and now you have to do this on every one of your client platforms. You have to do it on the web, you have to do it on iOS. So you have to do this a few more times, and so now it's starting to get, pretty daunting. I'm not sure if you really want to sign up for this. And in fact, as you do it for the third time, you're probably thinking there's got to be something better. And the idea here is that, it's not just building this UI, it's building all of the back end, maintaining that, ensuring that it's secure, up to date. This can be a ton of work. And in fact, to illustrate how much work it is, we built this as part of Firebase, and we counted how many lines of code it took just for the client side, just to build the UI on each of these platforms. And then if you add all this up, it's, well over 10,000 lines of code. That's a lot of time and effort and work that you probably don't have if you're a small company or you've got a limited set of developers for each platform. So this is not a situation that you want to be in. And so that's really why I suggest something like Firebase. And as I mentioned, there are many others. There's a really good one out there called Auth0 that provides the same functionality, even as a service, maybe even more functionality than Firebase. But it takes what was previously thousands of lines of code and allows you to drop in as an SDK in less than 5 lines of code in some platforms, the ability to invoke UI, interact with the backend, and build an entire authentication system out of the box. And it looks something like this. You can even customize it, theme it. And the best part is that it's actually open source. We open source the entire UI here. So if you'd like to see how all of these principles and practices that I've talked about today are actually implemented, you can check out the source code. You can take it, branch it. But if you leave the basic things intact, you'll actually get updates as we add new functionality. So definitely check that out. It comes with all of the things that I mentioned here, the ability to customize, cross-platforms, and so on. And it's all open source, so you can see how it works. And it comes with all of the backend that I mentioned earlier, basically the different types of sign-in methods, Google, Facebook, and so on, client SDKs for Android, iOS, and the web, all of the backend pieces that you need to be able to interact with this from a server that you build yourself, and then a whole console to manage all of the users, see how many users you've got, help them reset passwords, and do things like analytics. So a very powerful set of systems that you can get basically with a few lines of code, and it's all free. So definitely check that out before building something yourself. But if you do have that existing account system, try to apply some of the principles that I talked about today. Ask for the identifier first. Ask them at the right time. Making that sign up easy. Keep them signed in automatically. Link accounts together. And finally, leverage the tools that are out there to build some of this with the help of the professionals and not by yourself. So with that, I think we probably have time for a few questions. So if you'd like to ask something to me, I can take questions here, or we can chat afterwards. I would love to get your feedback, and we'll hope to post this online and make it available to everyone.
Thank you, Stephen.
I got a question about if I use no own password, but instead let the user log in with a social account, and he then deletes the social account. How can I recover from this situation?
Yeah, so the typical suggestion we've got there is make sure that when you do the social request, get some other piece of contact information. So that's the name or the phone number for the user, so that if they don't have access to the social account or they delete the social account, you can tell them, hey, recover by sending an email or sending an SMS and setting a password for your account.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Who wants the microphone? Okay, coming.
Can you recommend a solution for two-factor authentication?
Yep. So that's a good question. We don't have two-factor authentication in the Google libraries yet, other than that if someone does sign in with their Google account, they can turn on two-factor authentication there. That said, two-factor authentication in general is actually kind of a double-edged sword. That on the one hand, it can prevent certain types of attacks, the password reuse and the weak password scenario, but it's still not invulnerable to phishing. And the UX cost, the enrollment process and the setup can be pretty burdensome. So it's a careful trade-off that you have to do in considering two-factor authentication. For Google's own account system, we do a risk-based authentication. We look at many signals and will intelligently prompt for a second factor whether someone is signed in this device or not before, to try to minimize the number of times that people have to enroll. So it's a kind of a messy scenario that is you have to be a little bit careful about enrolling. So I'll talk to you more later about solutions that you can use there.
Somebody else. Yep, Stefan.
So when we are talking with clients about integrating any of those solutions, a big worry is about handing over the control of user authentication to a third party, even if it's the big Google. Is there any transition path out of this again if you're not happy with this solution, or do you suddenly use all your user base? And yeah, that's a big worry. How's the exit route, if there's any?
Yeah, I think the exit route probably is going to be tricky, but that's kind of one of the trade-offs, I guess, to think about is the cost of building it and the value that you get versus, potential lock-in. So happy to chat more later about some ideas there. I think in the long term, as we see adoption, and especially feedback from developers on things like Firebase Auth, having the ability to export data and move to other systems is probably a completely valid feature request. Okay, if you've got more questions, I'll stick around for a few minutes and happy to chat. So thank you very much for your time.
No, wait.
Oh, do we have one more?
One question.
Okay, one more.
Hi, I have a question about Smart Lock. Now, one of the cool features of Smart Lock is that if you log in a website and you associate the application with the website, when you save that as the password to Chrome, you can get logged in automatically. Now, my question is, what happens if you have multiple domains, like a German one, a Dutch one, for example, and you want to associate a couple of domains? I know you can do that in the JSON file you upload to the website, but what I'm interested in is what happens between the websites. If I link multiple websites, if I save the password in Chrome, will I get that password for other websites as well, or does it work just for the application?
Yep. Basically, you'll get multiple passwords, and I'll tell you some of the technical details. I think we should probably let other folks onto the stage, but don't go anywhere. I'll answer it for you.
Thanks.
Okay.